Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Ronnie Moore, and our co-host, like normal, Kyle Jesse, will be joining us shortly. We've got a lot of busy schedules around here with the Opens wrapping up in the fall. College Series just wrapped up a little while ago, and we've got some team championship stuff coming up. So Kyle is a busy man, and he'll join us in just a few minutes. But for this episode of the Pattern of the Month, man, October is an underrated time of year to fish. The fall is normally really tough, but we get to see really cool things this time of the year. And so we wanted to bring on our guy, Kyle Welcher, who, when we did have a fall trail in 2020 for the Bassmaster Elite Series, one of the best anglers that whole season, but especially in that 3 or 4 tournament stretch in the fall. Kyle, I know you don't live in the woods hunting during this time of the year. You stay on the water 24/7, 365. So thank you for taking a little bit out of your schedule to join us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I would be doing right now, is out there fishing, but we're going to get a little bit of work done in the house for a little while.
Well, Kyle, I wanted to first kick it off with October is an interesting month of the year because there's people up north that are still, you live in the Alabama, Georgia area, right around the border there, and you bounce around to both states when you fish, but there's kind of a northern portion of people where the fishing is absolutely amazing for smallmouth that last month, but it could be tricky with bad weather. You get a 2 good days out of a 2-week stretch where it's not super windy or super stormy because winter is approaching up north. But for down south, man, it's finally some relief. We're getting 50-degree mornings. You're wearing a hoodie out on the lake. You take it off for short sleeves by noon. What is your mindset when you think about the month of October, when you go to rig up some rods, you go to prepare your day, whether it's a tournament or fishing for fun? What does October mean to you?
So to sum it up in one word, in my opinion, October is just flat out polarizing. And what that means is there's like 80% of the bass that are not going to bite no matter what you do, because they're still in that funk, or they start keying in on the shad, and they're just almost impossible to imitate our actual live shad. And then there's like 20% of fish that are just like feeding like crazy. They're eating whatever. They're on these main ambush points, and you can just, catch those really easily. So this time of year for me, I am fishing for aggressive bass. Like, I'm trying to pull up to the most obvious ambush points on the entire lake, and I'm going to make a few casts, and I'm going to keep running. So I cover a ton of water, and I never, this time of year especially, I don't try to trick the finicky ones. Like, I just keep moving, keep running. And honestly, it seems like to me, those 2.5 to 3 pounders are the really finicky ones. Those really big ones are sometimes the easiest ones to get to bite. And then those really little ones are sometimes the easiest ones to get to bite. So I feel like all that downsizing and drop shot and shaky heading this time of year, that'll give you those 2 to 2.5, 3 pounders more consistently. But you can still catch some really big ones if you just, kind of just go, head down and grind.
And sometimes we see that in tournaments. You'll see those guys, especially in a multi-day tournament, they want to be safe and secure. They maybe want to do that shaky head drop shot deal and fish for consistent sized fish. But we also see people, they'll come in with 3 for 18, 3 for 16. You get those big bites. And if you can put it together and add in a few other fish, you'll have what we call, maybe a Florida limit. You got 1 or 2 big ones and a couple small ones, but you'll normally be in contention because there are some of the biggest fish. Every season there will be big fish show up, but it's not just the spring or in the coldest winter of the year or month of the year where really, really big fish show up. Sometimes they expose themselves in the fall because they are on the move. So you can intersect them, whether they're out deep on their way shallow, whether they're mid-depth on their way, or, all those highways. You have a chance to intersect them coming or going, or when they stay one spot for a week or two. So for you, though, we saw you at Lake Gunnersville do this on Bassmaster Live all the time, just running and gunning. We said, we can't compare anybody necessarily to Kevin Van Dam when it comes to stats wise, but stylistically, I was like, whoever this Kyle Welcher guy is, he's about as close as we've seen on Bass Live to Kevin Van Dam, because his trolling motor is smoking from how fast he's going, and anything that looks good, you're stopping and fishing it.
Yep, and that's the thing about the fall too, is like, it's not even really about a pattern. It's like you pull over to a bluff bank with a laydown, and then you pull over to, like a blown in eelgrass mat, and you pull over to somewhere that the current just barely hits a little bit, so it's in the fall, it's not really like a pattern. It's literally exactly what you said. It's burning everything down and stopping on everything that, a bass might be. And really, it's just like, fundamentally, there's just a couple of things that bass look for in the fall. Basically, they want something over their head. They want something shallow, close to deep water, and they want something where they can be hid, and if a shad swims by, they're going to be able to ambush it. So ambush points, shallow, close to deep water, and something over their head is like the key recipe for catching big ones this time of year. So I just run down the lake and might skip under a dock, might flip in a lay down, might throw it up beside some rocks, anything like that. It's just constantly anything that's kind of got the right recipe. You just throw it all of it. That's kind of my approach to fall fishing anyways.
Well, my question to you is, we always think about this. Every time we have an event at Douglas, like I don't know if you fished many of the opens at Douglas or have seen those, but it seems like Douglas, and it might be different on that body of water than others, but whenever we hear about it, the fall, they talk about going to the dirty creeks or going back in creeks because that's where fish are migrating to. You want to go and get skinny in some of those places, a Lake Dardanelle, you can go way up a creek, whatever it is. But also we hear most times the biggest fish in the lake reside by the dam, which is not normally where a long creek is that you're going to get in the back of. So how do you balance? I know your style, you like to be shallow, you like to power fish, but how do you balance that when you think about the biggest fish in the lake? If you're not going to get many fish and the ones that are big might bite easiest, how do you balance living at the dam or living down in the southern region of lakes versus going up in the creeks as far as you can? You can spend a lot of your days running instead of actually fishing.
So this is something that I've actually studied a ton, like a lot. And basically, I'm going to be fishing for those biggest fish in the major feeding windows of the day. So it's going to be like first thing in the morning, till 8, till 9 o'clock. And then there's always a weird lull between like 9 and 12. I think the sun's just at a weird angle to where there's like enough light penetration where the fish are not still roaming around for low light conditions, but it's not all the way overhead to really position those bass. So whenever it's in those kind of funky times where those fish are not biting, I'm not going to really be gambling. That's whenever I'll call an audible. I'll go to fish that are a lot more aggressive. I'll usually go to current. I'll usually go to stained water, anything that kind of gives me a little bit more of an advantage whenever those fish are not in that feeding window. So, and then also around here, a lot of the lakes that we have, at least in the South, they have a lot of spotted bass and they have a lot of largemouth. So those major feeding windows, all in on largemouth, because that's where your 4, 5, 6 pounders are going to come from. Those weird times of days, I'm always going to be throwing baits or fishing areas where there's a lot of both. Because I don't like, sometimes you need a 2-pound spot. Like I'm not going to shake my head at a 2-pound spot, So that's kind of what I do. I'm always trying to do things that give me an advantage when those fish are not really feeding. But yeah, definitely I'm going to be fishing for those big ones, the 2 or 3 major feeding windows of the day for sure.
It's kind of a weird balance to have because you want to have, when they're not biting great, which is in those lull windows, you want to go to a place that you have most confidence in, but that normally is the place where you might have started the day just a little bit ago.
Right.
So we've seen some guys and some anglers or maybe lower level competition that are trying to get better. We see them maybe stay too long. So there is a balance between running too much and staying too long, because you do not want to stay in your best area during the lull and lose confidence in it going into the next day, going into days after that. So, I mean, I guess, are you wanting to find multiple areas within a similar region, or are you going to try to really make a run and make a huge adjustment to current, to dirty water, like you said, in a drastically different area of the lake?
So if I feel like it's my only shot, I'll make a drastic run. Like the way I see it is you've got 8 hours, out there in a tournament typically. And I will spend 7 of those hours running if it gives me the best chance of catching the 5 biggest fish I can catch. So for me, instead of, like grinding, and I played poker for a long time. So I think about it all in kind of the realm of like expected value. It's like you can fish in a bad area for more time, but that's not going to give you an expectation of more bites, but just because you have more time doesn't always equate to get more bites of fishing time. So if I can run 30 minutes and fish somewhere for an hour and then run 30 minutes back, and I think I'm going to get 4 bites in that hour of fishing time, that's better than staying in a bad area for the whole 2 hours and getting 2 bites. So I'll spend a lot of time running if I think that that's my best shot. So especially if I know that an area has something special. Now, I'm not just going to go pull the trolling motor up and go run 40 miles for something that might get a bite. But if I've got a place where I'm like, look, there was a bunch of them here in practice. It's like the most perfect place on the lake. It's got tons of bait. I know there's a bunch of bass in there. I should pull up and just start getting bites instantly. Yeah, I'll definitely make a drastic change for that. And then I'll run all the way back down if I feel like they're going to be biting down at the dam, if that's where I think the big ones are or whatever. I will. Like, I'll do a ton of running around because, like I said, it's all about the expectation of how many bites you can get in the amount of time that you have. So sometimes it's best to run. Sometimes it's best to stay put. I'll say this, in a multi-day tournament, you really don't want to commit to one area unless it's pre-spawn, because then they're coming to you. It seems like in the fall, you better have like a herring lake or something where they're just crazy feeding on shad to make one area last for 2 or 3 days. So for me, I kind of do like to stretch my legs a little bit and go just kind of run around and kind of sample some things, because if you're going to do good in a 2, 3, 4 day tournament, you're going to have to build on stuff. You're going to have to find some new fish. So I do run around sometimes more than you should, but that's just my thought process on it.
Sometimes you're the first person I've ever seen in my life have to get gas at Lake Gunnersville because you ran around so much. But I will say, those high percentage areas in the fall, we always think if there's bait, there's going to be bass. And in the fall, not every part of the bank is high percentage. So you want to be around that bait because the bass aren't going to be too far away. But how do you ride that line of being close to your greatest enemy? The shad is the perfect imitator of themselves compared to your fake lures that you're trying to trick them with. So is there a time where Kyle Welcher's like, I'm around too much bait, I got to go in the vicinity, or I got to change it up and throw something that's really bright and not shad looking, or just be different? Or do I have to get in with the crowd of bait and try to just trick them that way? Because that could be some of the hardest things, especially with forward facing sonar, especially with how finicky they can already be. Blending in is very difficult to get their attention, but also being completely drastic, they got to be really kind of aggressive and dumb to fall for that at times.
Right. So here's my approach on that. There's places where bass live and there's places where bass feed. And sometimes they'll be really close to each other, but they won't really be the same at all. So if you're in some kind of a big creek, a big like featureless bay, just say like we have some place around here that are just clay bays, sandy bays, and the shad will just get in them every single fall. And the bass are there. And 8 or 10 times throughout the day, the bass will come up schooling. So if you want to go spend your tournament sitting on those fish, praying that you catch 5 of them when they come up schooling, that's fine. That's what you want to do. But for me, I like to find those shad close to a brush pile, close to, a big rock point, close to something that those bass can actually sit on and feel safe and feel like they're hunting. It's because whenever the bass are not aggressive and the shad are just kind of meandering around, those bass will suspend under them. And they'll suspend under them for like weeks at a time, a lot of times this time of year, and they'll just eat them when they're hungry, So I don't like waiting on a bass to be hungry. Like, to me, it just seems like a waste of time a lot of times. And I've had days doing it. Like, I've been out and I have done it. Like, I've sit there on them for all day long and got them to bite. And I've had days where it's like, this is never going to work, So it's a lot of that's kind of a luck factor. And I don't like to do that. So if the big balls of shad or whatever are around something, I'm going to scan around. Is there some standing timber close by that comes up shallow? Because that's kind of where those fish are going to want to sit and wait for those shad to come by. Is there a brush pile? Is there a rock point? I'm always going to want to try to find something that makes those bass feel a little bit safe, so that whenever something does come by, they can come out and attack it. So those fish that suspend under the bait, I kind of leave those alone during tournaments.
Well, so that kind of lends me to the thought process. I want you to give us a couple baits in the fall. I would listen to some other pros because they're really smart and they're really successful, but they kind of put their rods up this time of the year. So I'm really interested to know 3 types of baits that you throw, or 3 baits that you throw in the fall, on the bank. And then, like we mentioned, if you are on some structure, maybe a little bit deeper, or around schools of fish, not just the big ones, one-off fish every now and then up shallow. Give me 3 baits up there and 3 baits off the bank a little bit that you would probably rely on a lot they're going to stay rigged up from the end of the season to the winter time.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll start with the ones offshore, because that's actually, people don't realize this, but whenever I'm fun fishing, that's what I do a ton. Like, I love getting out there. Like, I live close to West Point Lake, and I love getting out there and just fishing for spotted bass. And they're hard to catch, big ones, but there's some 3-pounders in there. And I mean, I've been out there and caught some 14-pound bags of straight spots, which is a really big bag of spots out there. Not in a tournament, because I don't fish like that in tournaments, but typically it's going to be like a Damiki style bait, and usually it's going to be a heavy one, something I can get it to the fish very fast. So whenever you see those fish that are suspended under those bait balls, every once in a while, you'll see them on the forward face sonar. They'll actually start running through the bait balls, and you'll see them, like you'll see the bait just open up and the fish be running through them. That's whenever they're feeding down, and you can't really tell it unless you're using the forward face sonar. So something heavy like a Demiki rig that's still small that gets to them really good, that's a really good one. And also those fish that are over the brush piles and over those rock point stuff that just kind of suspend and won't commit, it's a really good bait for just kind of dragging over that also. But
I have
the
a question
shallower,
before you go on from that one.
yeah,
Is forward-facing sonar the only reason why the Demiki rig doesn't just play in winter? Because in 2017 when we went to Cherokee and everyone learned about it, it was just a winter bait. But now we use a jig head minnow every day of the year because we've seen how many fish just suspend out there. Because it used to be, oh, it just sits there and it's non-intrusive and it's cold water and they're lethargic, they're going to bite it. Now we see it on some of the most aggressive fish in the world. You drop it straight on their head and they bite it immediately. Is that because of the technology or because we just didn't know much about those fish offshore?
I think it's because of the technology, because there's a trick to the Demiki rig, and you could see like Cherokee Lake, I think it was, whenever it came to kind of to fame. I know the local guys had it forever, but
sure.
So they were dropping it down to the bottom. They were reeling it up, 36 inches, 48 inches, something like that, close to the bottom, and then drift it over these rocks, and the fish come out of it and eat it. Well, there's a perfect threshold to where the fish is interested and can't see it quite good enough, and then will eat the bait. So a lot of times when you're throwing that Demiki rig to them, if you let it get too close to them, you'll never get a bite. If you let it sink past them, you will absolutely never get a bite. So the thing about that forward face of sonar is you can really see your bait get close to them, and then you can tell as soon as the fish shows interest in them, in the bait. And then as soon as it shows interest in the bait, you actually have to start keeping it away from them. So you pick your rod up and almost pull it away from them. And then whenever they start to commit to it, you just keep it on that same trajectory and they'll eat it. So without forward face of sonar, you would have never been able to know your bait's actual proximity to that fish. And then that is for sure the most important part of the Demiki rig fishing is how close it is to it. And I mean, we don't even fish it like a Demiki rig anymore. You throw it out, you peninsula it to them, you throw it out, and you reel it over their head. It ain't like it was, but it's still a really, really good bait when they're feeding on shad. And you catch spotted bass, just love it. Smallmouth, love it. I've caught big largemouth on it. I caught like a 4.5 pounder on Santee. So I mean, they're all fish like that thing.
It's crazy. Go ahead with your baits now. Sorry for the offshore. I just wanted to ask that because it's something that's been, we just hear, we only used to hear that word 1 month a year. Now we hear that word a whole bunch. And so I figured it was technology based.
Yep. So another really, really good one that honestly 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't throw a lot, but now I've been throwing it a ton. I started throwing it last fall a lot, throwing it this fall a lot, been catching one that caught some big shoal bass on it too, actually. But it's actually like a underspin, like a weedless underspin. Well, like, you put a 3.8 swim bait on it, screw lock, and you can throw it and you can actually reel it through the tips of these brush, that are shallower around the bait and stuff. You can skip it under docks and reel it. That's something that for me, 4 or 5 years ago, I don't know if I ever even caught a fish on it, which is kind of sad. But now I catch a bunch of them on it. And, it's just a really good bait in the fall because it has that blade on it. And it just seems to trigger them really, really good, especially those shallower offshore fish. I don't fish that 20 feet deep or nothing. I'm usually fishing it 6, 8, 12, not really any deeper than that because the thermocline starts to get shallow this time of year because we have less current in our lakes. We got less rain, all this type of stuff. So those shad have to push a little bit shallower. So that's what I'm throwing around those shallower brush piles and all that type of stuff. And another really good bait they get on this time of year that they're not on in the hotter months is a jig. Seems like to me, after the fish spawn, like pre-spawn, a jig's a phenomenal bait. After they spawn, it gets really tough to catch consistent numbers of fish. It still catches really big ones.
Kind of like you
but
transition to worms and then you transition back to jigs. Yeah.
You start seeing people flipping creature baits and stuff instead of jigs a lot in the summer months. And then this time of year, they get back on the jig profile better than a creature bait a lot of times. I don't really know why. Something about the profile and when the water starts getting cold. I think another thing is there's less light penetration in the water in the fall. And that just big profile that they can't really get as good of a look at whenever there's less light penetration is just one thing that's, makes them bite it, I guess. I don't know. If they get on the jig really good, I throw that around all the shallow brush, flipping the pole timber, dragging over all, the rock piles, all that type of stuff. So that's my 3. If I had to fish deep or fish not really deep, but offshore, that'd be my 3 that I'm going to fish with the most. And then for fishing on the bank this time of year, it's going to be a lot about topwater because that's just what the big ones bite. Like there's an open right now. I mean, they're catching big ones on top water. That's just what happens, you know. And a buzz bait for me is probably the best all around. You know, like a plopper style bait catches a lot of big ones, but I like to fish heavy cover, skip it under docks, all that type of stuff. So I had to pick one kind of winding top water. It's going to be the buzz bait with a soft plastic on back because they eat it a little bit better. But I mean, that's just, you catch them from 6 inches deep all the way out to 7, 8, 9 feet deep this time of year on that thing. If the water's clear, and catch a lot of big ones. Like I'll go through that thing all day long when I'm fishing shallow.
Especially if you're around
Another
cover. That's the cover top water, because
Yep.
if you don't really have a pattern, I feel like you can throw the plopping style top water because you just parallel it and you just can cover water, and then they show you where they might be. And if it's around some structure, that's where you'll throw the buzzbait, because it's a lot easier to be efficient there compared to just open water, just bombing. You know, you're not going to throw that around there. So that makes sense.
Right.
And
Yep.
with your style, you're going to be throwing this up in a creek somewhere, up, you know,
Yeah.
bringing it off the bank almost, you know.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that's a big key this time of year. Is we have a shallow, there's a lot of wolf packs this time of year, and you see them with your eyes. I mean, a lot of people have been out there and seen them swim down seawalls, swim down rock banks. Exactly what you said is a key. Up on the bank, if they chase it off the bank, the odds of that fish biting is very low. But if they pin it against the bank, that fish is going to bite like a big percentage of the time, unless you spook it first. So on the bank is a very, very key. I'm talking about, you want your buzzbait blade to be clicking the seawall pretty much. Like you want it up there. So that's a big, big key.
It might be one of the most nervous casts you have when you see 3 or 4 in a wolf pack swimming. You know it's about to get competitive, but you're like, don't backlash, don't mess this cast up. Like you got to land it right in front of them and bring it, and they just, you know, will hit it or they won't, you know.
Yeah, I was fishing the other day with a buddy of mine, and we seen like 4 4-pounder swimming down the bank. And I was like, look, and I picked the buzzbait up and I landed it right in the middle of them. I mean, it sounded like a bowling ball fell out of an airplane. Like I just completely screwed it up. So I mean, none of us are immune to it. Like you're gonna screw them up sometimes. Like it's really, really fun when you don't and they come over there and bite it. So that's awesome. But another really good one, like I said, we have a lot of spots in our lake, stuff like that. A walking topwater is a big key this time of year. And I know I'm topwater heavy, but that's what we do, you know, in the fall. Like that's a lot of topwater. If you're around, you know, like Gunnersville or grass lakes and stuff, it's going to be a lot different. You know, it's going to be frogging mats and punching mats on a chatterbait and buzzbaits and stuff kind of offshore. But for me, it's going to be a walking topwater on those shallow points that are,
they're all, you know, they're looking up. A lot of these fish are looking up this time of the year.
They're looking up. And also it just seems like even those fish that you see cruising, very, very difficult to get them to commit to something on bottom. Like very difficult. It's like they've just been fished for so much all summer, and they just don't get quite as good of a look at that top water. It's just easier to trick them. And they get used to, when they start feeding on shad primarily, the number one thing they pin shad to is the surface. That's why they come up schooling, you know, because they're trying to pin those shad up. When they're feeding on bluegill and stuff, it's not quite as much as they're feeding up. But on the like crawfish, obviously they pin them to the bottom. But shad, they pin them to the surface because that's as far as the shad can run, you know. So when they get on that bait, it's definitely a topwater deal. There, you know, it's topwater primarily. And then the topwater walking style bait, you throw that on anything that's kind of off the bank, 2 foot or deeper, you know, kind of in any of those shallow ambush points close to the river channel. And then if you're going to be fishing shallow, like I said, they start eating the jig again this time of year. So flipping it around docks, flipping it around shallower trees, all that type of stuff. I keep it pretty simple. If I find a bait that the bass are biting, I just kind of lean on it and I just throw it a lot and just make sure that, you know, I'm going to get some bites throughout the day. Because like I said, all the fish this time of year are not biting. So if you get on a bait that they are eating, you probably want to lean on that one.
I have a question for you about wolf pack fish. When you do see those 3 to 5, you know, 2 to 4 fish schools that are swimming up shallow, those are the schools that I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about the 50 fish schools offshore. My style is like your style. So I'm thinking about, man, if I could find a bank that had 3 or 4 on it, that's a fantastic spot. How do you approach those? Because we don't know where they live. We don't know. You might catch them or visually see them on this spot of the bank as they're going this way. They could have been swimming this way for a mile. I don't know where they came from. I don't know where they call home. How do you rely on that in a tournament? Or is it one of those things where you hope to find 2 or 3 wolf packs during the day and you just have to burn your trolling motor up hoping to see them and at the same time be stealthy? Because yeah, like I said, we don't know where they live, but we do know when we see them, it could be the best 5 minutes of the day. Like you only need that 5-minute window to win a tournament.
So that has a lot to do with the population of bass in a lake. So like a famous lake that they wolf pack on is Hartwell. Like it's well known they wolf pack on Hartwell. Every pocket you go in, if you're in a good area of the lake, you're going to see a wolf pack in every single pocket. Sometimes you might see multiple in every single pocket. These lakes I have at home, you don't see near as many. So if I'm fish tournament around here, I got to have either a really good bag and try to catch a big one to go fish for them wolf packs, or I got to be super desperate to go fish them wolf
You
packs.
just want big bass money. That's it.
That's exactly right. But I have spent hours chasing around the exact same fish out here whenever I was younger. And I was trying, like, cause I was like, where are they going? Why are they here? Why are they not here tomorrow? Like, I don't understand it. And with forward face sonar, I've actually followed them, and it's weird. They'll go down the same exact stretch of bank. I've been doing it on the same lake for years now. I'll see them on the exact same spot, like going out towards the mouth of a creek. I'll never see them pass like this one point. And then all of a sudden from this point, there'll be like 3/4 of a mile where I see them all the way down through there, and I never see them pass this back point. And I have followed them, and this in a bunch of different creeks have like the same kind of logistics on it, where I'll never see them pass this, I'll never see them pass this. And I have followed them down this stretch, and all of a sudden they'll go under a dock, and they'll turn around and then just start going back the other way. And I'll just let them swim by me, and then I'll follow them back the other way. And then I've also followed them to where they go down a pocket and they get to the point where I've never seen them pass, and they'll just cut and swim straight across the deep water to the other side of the pocket that's 1/4 mile away. And they'll just swim. And I have tried to follow them on forward face sonar, and I have followed them for a while and then lost them. But they'll be like 6 or 8 foot deep in the middle of 40 feet of water, swimming right across the pocket. So they have something biologically that tells them this is the path, like this is where it is. And a lot of times it's bottom, like you can kind of tell whenever you get to a silty sandy flat that they never swim across it. Like they're done, like they're just going to turn around, or sometimes they'll just like cut a corner and then run back to the next hard bottom, that's on down the pocket or whatever. But there is something biologically that tells them this is where we hunt. And then whenever we're done with this, we go across to the other side, and there's some good stuff over there. So I have spent hours following them. There is a pattern to it, and it can actually be very, very consistent that you see them. It's just the problem is, so like whenever you're fishing offshore, you're fishing for fish that you're not visually looking for. You're going to flip your jig in front of like 12 of them before you catch one. It's very frustrating when you fish shallow because you see all 12 of them that don't bite. It doesn't mean that they're, so sometimes when you spook them, yeah, they are harder to catch, but it doesn't mean that those fish are actually harder to catch. It's just you see all of them that decide not to bite.
Yeah, it drives you nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you skip under a dock, you never even knew there was, 4 of them looking at it. That was like, nah, not today.
And the only difference is during the spawn, we can see them and they're not going anywhere. We know where they're living, where they're staying until they're done. But when every other time of the year they're roaming, we're like, I don't know where this guy lives. He's just walking down the road. You know what I'm saying? You drive through a neighborhood, you don't know where that person is. They're just walking around with their kids. That's interesting you say that. And I always think when we catch bass, they're dumb creatures. When we don't catch them, we give them so much credit for being smart. But so it's interesting that you said you've seen them, stylistically, or patterns of them just cruising down the bank aimlessly, it seems. So, well, that's very interesting. I'll ask you this, dirty water. We talked about, we get those fall rains and it does dirty up some of the creeks. It puts in new fresh water, because the fact of the matter is we do have a thermocline, but when it comes to fresh oxygen, one of the best ways to get that, other than waiting for the turnover, is actual storms that happen this time of the year and the weather changes. So when we get to those dirtier water places, are you going to use those same top waters, or are you going to have to switch it up a little bit and use something subsurface that's a little bit more vibration? Is there anything else you'll mix in there that's not just a clear water, top water deal?
Yeah, so there is, the buzz bait stays no matter what. One thing I'll do though in clear water is I'll actually use like a buzz bait that has, so it's not actually a 1/4 ounce blade, because that's not what the blade weighs, but like on a typical 1/4 ounce buzz bait, there's like a size blade, that's a standard. That's the one that I'm going to use in clear water. Well, in dirty water, I'm going to use a blade that typically comes on a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce buzz bait, like a big blade, to just make it go really slow, create a little bit more thump, a little more gurgle in the water. And that's what I'm going to throw in that muddy water. But also, like, Spro has a Fat John crankbait that only goes like 1 foot to 3 foot deep. that's a really, really good bait in that clear water. Get like a chartreuse one and then just go bump it over super, super shallow rocks and wood. And like you said, that fresh water on the oxygen, that's kind of why I think a lot of those fish are cruising. It's because up there super shallow, there's more oxygen in the water. Well, that water that's running in, they want to get up there super shallow. So I don't want to use a 4 or 5 or 6 foot dive and crankbait a lot of times that time of year. I want something that's going to be bumping in a foot to 3 foot, because that's where those fish are going to be sitting in that runoff. So that's another really, really good key, is in that fresh, dirty water, super, super shallow with, you know, a little square bill or something like that. It's a really, really good one. But the buzzbait stays and the jig stays. I might just change colors to like a black and blue or something like that.
I wanted to, before we let you go, I wanted to talk about that 2020. I mentioned it at the top of the show, how good you did in that couple stretch of events. I believe it was Gunnersville, Chickamauga, Santee, and those 3 stretches there. I think you had 2 top 10s and a top 30, you know, and so what a great stretch there was. For you, is that something you want this time of the year, is fishing back to back to back to back days? You know, it's almost like you fish 20 days in a row out of the 21 possible days, because practice, tournament, it keeps, even on different bodies of water, it just keeps you dialed into where fish are moving in the fall. And we always think it's so hard to track them, but if you do stay on the water for an entire month, you can track fall fish. And it seems like you had it dialed in. No matter where you were going, you were in tune with what they were going to be doing that stretch. Is that important to you?
Yeah, you know, I kind of kept it simple for all 3 of those tournaments. It was, I mean, moving water in like all 3 of them. I fished moving water for at least a little bit of every single day, and then fished those same ambush points. You know, I fished docks and trees and laydowns and grass and everything everywhere that we went that time of year. So, I mean, for me, I like fall fishing because I'm a junk fisherman at heart. You know, I like to catch one on a buzzbait, catch one on a chatterbait, catch one flipping a jig, you know, like all that type of stuff. To me, I like it. I enjoy doing that type of stuff. So, I mean, I got fortunate and caught a couple big ones at every single one of those tournaments, which is a huge key, especially in the fall, because it goes a little bit further than it does pre-spawn. But typically it was just, you know, a lot of running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and it just seemed to work out in those tournaments. So I don't think it was really, I was super dialed in. I just was throwing baits that I had a lot of confidence in. I was in areas I had a lot of confidence in, and I was able to get a couple big bites every single one of those tournaments. So, I mean, it was fun. I'd like to see us have some more fall tournaments. I'd like to see us fish 20 tournaments a year instead of 9, you know, but that's just me because I like to fish a ton. So that's just kind of my approach to the fall fishing, though, was run and gun, stay in good areas. Don't waste time, because if you waste time in the fall, it's really hard to make up for it. It's not like in the spring where when you get around them, you can catch like 15 different fish in 2 hours. Like the fall is typically not like that. Like it's like be efficient as you possibly can and keep it moving and stay around them and fish baits with confidence. So that's what I did those 3 tournaments.
Well, I did have a question. I didn't know. I'm glad that you're doing okay. And then I see you on the Zoom call. You're alive and well, because I hadn't seen you all year. You know, I thought you had gotten kidnapped. And so I was going to ask you to end the show, are we going to see a return of Kyle Welcher? And if so, can you kind of sum up quickly what didn't go right for you this year and what you're going to do in the offseason? Is it going to be status quo, just continuing to fish? Or are you going to maybe take a break and switch it up, or are you going to just stay hard on it, so next year you're just in rhythm, you know, getting into on the water?
So I think I'm going to pre-practice more for next year. I've never pre-practiced my first year, second year, or third year. Like it's worked out my first 2 years. Last year it didn't work out too well, but I think I'm going to spend more time kind of pre-practicing at some of these lakes that I've never been to or only been to a couple of times. I'm going to try to really get a good feel for it. And it just seemed like this year we had bad weather for a lot of events this year, which made it extremely tough. And when you're fishing in a tough tournament and you get misled a lot of times, it hurts you really, really bad because it's hard to make up for it. It's like the first few tournaments that we went to, I just never got it going. Like I would have a decent practice, almost like practice was just good enough to tell you how to waste time during the tournament. Like it was never good enough to tell you what was actually going on. It was just like, yeah, you can go do this for the first 6 hours of the tournament. You'll have 2,
Bunch
you know,
of
and then you better go
bites.
scrambling. So that's how it kind of felt for a lot of this, you know, season. But it felt like it just never kind of came together. I didn't feel like I've reflected on it. I definitely made some bad decisions. I definitely lost some key fish, which, you know, that's just going to happen. So I'm not trying to say that I'm just a victim of bad luck. Like, I definitely made some bad decisions, wasted some time. But sometimes you just kind of need like some positive reinforcement that you're doing the right thing in these tournaments. You know, like you have to get that bite that clues you in. And it's a lot better to get that bite that clues you in at 11 o'clock on day one than it is on day one of practice, because that clue might be gone by the time day one's there. So it just seemed like during the tournament, I never got that lucky bite that said, hey, this is what you need to be doing. I mean, I had a few good tournaments, you know, but I had a few really bad ones also. So I think next year we're just going to try to be a little bit more consistent, not try to hit a home run in every single tournament. Just make sure we go out there and get us some dang bites, because this year it was tough to get bites in a few of them tournaments for me. So we're gonna have to get back to the basics on that and just make sure we're reeling in a bass or two at least.
Well, I'll say, yeah, looking at your finishes, the second half of the year, it got much better. And you know, you might have missed the cut in some of those events, but they weren't bombs. We wouldn't consider them bombs. But when you do start the year out with a couple really tough finishes, it's hard to make up points unless you're making cuts. And so if you can make your end of the season your floor, you know, and make the beginning of the season your thriving time, then it'll all be good. But Kyle, I appreciate you joining us. Sorry for that hard question at the end. Everybody's asking that. Me and Kyle did fantasy podcasts all year, and we're like, why is Kyle Welcher still in bucket E? He does not belong in bucket E. I don't know what he's doing in bucket E. So next year's schedule, though, it does seem like it would fit your style a lot. This year's schedule did too, but like you said, weather was different. So I appreciate you joining us for this month's episode of Pattern of the Month. If anyone on the Elite Series fishes most of October, I would say it's Kyle Welcher. So take all of his thoughts on Clearwater, a couple deeper baits, and all those bank dwelling baits that he talks about. Cover some water this fall. You'll probably get plenty of bites and some big ones mixed in as well. Kyle, appreciate you, man.
Yep. Thanks, man. See y'all.